Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to, I would say, the third section of our Spring Sync. Thank you so much for dedicating your time today to be here and get some professional development. My name is Leandra Ross, and I am the Regional Director in the South within our Access Lex Center for Education and Financial Capability. And you are joining us for a phenomenal session today called Making the Dollars Make Sense, helping students understand their return on investment. It's such a timely topic, and I think it blends nicely with the previous session if you joined my colleague Tiffany Cochran on the data around ensuring students make the right decision for their law school journey. It's a privilege for me to moderate this session because I think, again, we all appreciate that importance of helping our students evaluate that return on investment or ROI in their law school decision. And each year, the cost of attending law school ticks a little higher. So it's important for applicants to really feel like they have that assistance they need to get the best return on their investment. So today I have my colleagues with me, my wonderful colleagues at University of Alabama Office of Pre-Law Advising. They are going to talk to you about how they work with applicants and how you can work with applicants in calculating their law school return on investment. Before I turn it over to them to introduce themselves, just some housekeeping. We love your questions. So during our time today, go ahead and drop those questions in the Q&A panel. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom part of your screen. Get those in there. If we have some time towards the end, we will certainly address those questions and have some good dialogue going. With that, I'll turn it over to Hannah to introduce herself.
Thank you, Leandra. My name is Hannah Berman. I'm the Director of Pre-Law Advising at the University of Alabama. I've been an academic advisor now for 6 years, and 4 of those 6 years I have served as a pre-law advisor, so I've seen quite a bit change in the last 4 years between the LSAT, moving from paper to digital to an at-home test, all very quickly, and how we've all had to pivot and navigate the pandemic over these last few years. And what I really love about this position is the joy that we have in working with the diverse student population and all of the services and efforts that we bring to the table for students who are looking to go to law school. And now I'll turn it over to Royce.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited about this session. My name is Royce Garrison. I'm pre-law advisor here at the University of Alabama. I've been an employee of the University of Alabama for 10 years. In September, it will be my 10-year anniversary. My very first job at the University of Alabama was actually working in the law school admissions office. So that was my first exposure to higher education. And I'm very passionate about helping our students attend their dream law school. I've been a pre-law advisor now for just about 3 years. I started right before COVID. So I've definitely had an interesting time as pre-law advisor through these last several years. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our pre-law program here at the University of Alabama. So here at the University of Alabama, we provide students potentially interested in a career in law with comprehensive experience, featuring diverse opportunities, information, and insight that allows each individual to make an informed decision about attending law school. We offer hands-on assistance, guidance, and resources through each phase of the application process to maximize the likelihood of acceptance at each student's preferred law school choices. And some of the ways we do this for our students, we, of course, have our law school fair every year in January. That is one of our, along with our pre-law week, to serve our students. We also offer a junior-senior pre-law seminar course, AS 299, that we teach for our students as well. So there's lots of different ways that we support our students here at the University of Alabama, and we're really excited to share our strategies with you today.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah and Royce. And Royce, happy 10 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So we really want to be guided and intentional in our conversation today on what the return on investment looks like for our students. And as I said before, if you joined the session before, I think, Tiffany gave us some really good insight in the data-informed pre-law advising space. So she shared some really good data points about the students that we work with and provided some insights on several comprehensive resources that can help us in those return on investment conversations with our students. So with the first question for you, Hannah and Royce, it's really looking at first, before we can advise students, how can administrators prepare themselves for that ROI discussion with students? And I'll turn it over to you to share some of that with us.
So whether you are a new pre-law advisor, a newer pre-law advisor, or a seasoned pre-law advisor, I think it's always important to do self-reflection and check-in, and just to remember that every student has different needs and has different goals. You may have two students who both want to go into corporate law, but how they get there can look incredibly different. And so I think it's important to think about the timeline and the cycle of the application process, and to be as aware as possible with what's going on in the admissions field as well as what's going on with the LSAT. So we all know sort of the golden rule, or maybe you're not familiar with that golden rule of applying early is generally better for students. However, in thinking about every circumstance is different, perhaps that student is waiting on a GPA increase. Perhaps they're rethinking, or they're thinking about retaking the LSAT, or they may not know, what are my first steps? Where do I even start? Many of our students come from rural areas where they don't know what a lawyer does. They've never met an attorney in their life, or they have no one in their family who has gone to law school. So I would always enter the conversation with the understanding that some students may be starting from ground zero and have to work their way up. So I think it's critical for us as pre-law advisors to be on top of what's going on, again, with the LSAT and sort of the admissions world. And so understanding that the first hurdle, of course, is the LSAT. How do I sign up for it? What is it going to cost me? What is it going to cost me to prepare for it? What are the resources out there that could range from free to low cost to perhaps maybe a little bit more pricey? And being aware of all of those options, I think, is critical to helping that student when we eventually talk about building your budget and thinking about how all these dollars do add up over time, being mindful that not every student is coming with the same capital or they're coming from the same resources. Of how to access those resources is incredibly important. So, of course, LSSC offers, in collaboration with Khan Academy, which is free or low cost to students, but there are other resources out there that can be critical for LSAT success as well. And of course, Access Lex has their own information that can help students navigate how to prepare for the LSAT and what to know going through that process. So we get them through that first hurdle, right, of, okay, I know I have to take the LSAT, or more than likely I have to take the LSAT, right? Now we know there's a conversation about GRE versus LSAT. Is the GRE perhaps the better strategy for me? And if so, helping them navigate, okay, these are the schools on my list that I'm going to narrow down to based on the ones I know that will accept the GRE. But again, there are different costs associated with that prep and how often they can take it. So I think for us, it's going to be important to also navigate not just the LSAT, but also the GRE question as law schools are weighing whether or not to accept it if they aren't already. So navigating past the test and then the actual application process. And we know that can be incredibly overwhelming, no matter whether they're applying to one school or 20 schools. There's an ongoing process with that I think we serve a critical point in coaching them and helping them to stay motivated and help them to feel encouraged. We're in their corner the whole time, right? So we get them through the application process. But then it doesn't stop there. There's also the seat deposit, right? And scholarship reconsideration conversation. So I always like to think of it in terms of a cycle and also the timeline that complements it to make sure our students as individuals are best prepared to navigate the entirety of it, not just the LSAT, not just the application, but also to that endpoint of goal of matriculating to law school and being successful after the first year. I would also recommend that if you're not already, whether you're a student or you're a pre-law advisor, to think about how to encourage students to network with law schools. Start those conversations early. if you are a pre-law advisor like myself who did not go to law school, I think it's critical for students to have those conversations with those people who are in it, whether they're attorneys or they're admissions reps, or perhaps they're alumni of your school who are currently going through their legal education. Having someone who is in it is going to speak volumes to the honest experience of law school and an honest experience of the application process and the LSAT. So again, whether you are a prospective applicant or you're a pre-law advisor, I know our regional law school partners are very open to having these conversations with students, and often with students who may not necessarily go to their law school. Maybe they're on their list, but they may be thinking about other schools. I think we all realistically know we encourage students, if possible, to apply to more than one school, so they're not putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so having that open dialogue and having that conversation of, what do I need to know, both either as a student or the pre-law advisor, of all the steps that I'm going to have to take to get to that endpoint of law school. And so another, again, a final resource I would consider paying attention to is if your law school admissions partners offer any pathway programs, if they offer any resources. There's the PLUS program. UA Law, Alabama Law does a PLUS program to help students from underserved backgrounds be prepared and essentially go through that boot camp experience of, is law school right for me? And again, what is it going to take for me to get there? So I think many of those are low cost. Sometimes they may have waivers, or they have ways of helping students get into those programs and be able to afford them. But you've got to start researching early. So for the pre-law advisors, I would say reach out to your law school admissions partners, do that data gathering, and have your checklist, have your resource document that you put on your website or you have for yourself of, okay, I know that summer's approaching. How can I really help my students get to where they need to be? And for students, check out the websites of the law schools. A lot of them have a wealth of information, both on their application process and their requirements, and also what else is going on at the law school that you can take advantage of. So that would be my biggest advice to both students and pre-law advisors when you're thinking about what is all of that information I'm going to need, not just for today's discussion, but also moving forward.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would like to just reiterate for, especially for as someone who worked in a law school admissions office, students oftentimes are timid about reaching out to law school admissions offices and speaking to them. But just like an undergraduate admissions office, that's their job to speak to prospective students. So I always encourage any students and pre-law advisors to really make those connections with your regional law schools. We're very fortunate here at the University of Alabama to have a law school right here on our campus. And then, of course, Cumberland at Sanford University right down the road, 50 miles away in Birmingham. So I think that's a really important part of preparing yourself for these return on investment discussions, is making sure that you have those connections with your law school admissions partners. Absolutely.
Great. And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but any listservs or other kind of support groups that you all have been tapping into, Royce or Hannah, that have been especially important in your advisement of students. So any listservs that you would maybe plug right now for the attendees on the line?
Yeah, absolutely. The Plank listserv, pre-law advisor listserv. There have been many times, especially as a new pre-law advisor, 3 years, I still say I'm pretty new to the job. There's been so many valuable resources that have been shared on that listserv. I believe it's one of the first things I did my first day as a new pre-law advisor was sign up for the Plank listserv. So if that's something you're not involved with, I definitely highly recommend getting connected with that.
Great. So we'll move right along and getting into the meat of the ROI discussion. So I keep referencing the previous session with my colleague Tiffany Cochran, because I think there are some overlapping data elements and resources that she mentioned that we're going to mention in our conversations today. But when you think of that ROI discussion with your students, what are some of those key elements that you include or believe should be included in that ROI discussion? So, thinking of some of the inputs of what to factor into that conversation, and then what are the outputs that students should be looking for to discern if it's going to be a good return on their investment?
So I think it's important to define the why. Why do you want to go to law school? You don't necessarily have to know what field you want to practice, nor do pre-law advisors have to know every field and possibility there is out there. This is why a lot of law schools have career centers, or they have dedicated professionals who will help you navigate through that process of doing interviews, whether it's on campus or remote. There are dedicated professionals, not just at the undergraduate level, right? Many schools have a career center or a career counselor. Law schools have their own career center people and their own career counselors. So that will come with time. But you do have to think about the why in terms of what you're hoping to get out of your next steps for your education and your professional journey. So if the answer is, I want to be a practicing attorney, in most states, you got to go to law school to be able to sit for the bar so that you can practice eventually. So it really comes down to, first, is the goal to practice eventually? That's a pretty solid answer, a pretty solid yes answer. If the question or the response is, well, I think I want to serve as maybe an advisor for a corporation, or maybe I want to go into politics, or maybe I want to advocate for children and families, there's a lot of different ways you can do that that don't necessarily require a JD. And so in thinking about it, I would do a little bit of research of other pathways that may speak to your interests, but perhaps may cost less, and may cost you less in terms of not just the money, but also your time to complete that degree. And by no means is this to discourage you from going to law school or say that you should never pursue a career as an attorney. But as we're having this honest conversation about, is law school worth it? It's 3 years of your life, and also could be a substantial amount of debt that you have to live with. And so I think it's smart to be having these honest conversations with your pre-law advisor, and also as a pre-law advisor with your students, to help navigate throughout the process, whether it's starting the application process or prior to. Always checking in to say, okay, are you still sure this is something you want to do? Have you talked to law schools yet? Again, when we previously touched on that networking element and doing that data gathering, again, just as Royce has touched on, those admissions people are going to be honest with you in terms of what have their alumni gone on to do and what are they practicing. That's certainly something that they can provide you more information about. I know in the previous session they had talked about the ABA 509 reports. So you can look at, on that same website, employment outcomes. So you can do a little bit of self-information gathering on how many students from this school are passing the bar, how many of them are going on to work in a field that perhaps I'm interested in. So this will require a little bit of work on your part and a little bit of self-reflection, but there's no downside to having a wealth of data at your disposal, whether it's having these conversations or pulling it directly from the ABA website or from the law school's website. The more information that you have, the more strategic of a decision you can make for yourself. So once you're able to say, yes, I confidently want to do this, then great. So you'll have to identify the costs that go with that. So there are, of course, the application costs. Now, I do want to point out that the Law School Admissions Council does have a fee waiver program. And some law schools will waive application costs for you. All you have to do is ask. And you can't get a no if you don't ask. So there's no harm in reaching out to law school admissions people, whether it's at a fair or if it's over email, to say, hey, I'm a prospective applicant and I may be experiencing some financial challenges. Is there anything that you could assist so that way I can apply to your school? So don't be afraid to ask. That's so critical as a part of applying to law school. Is always ask if you're unsure, and if there are resources available, take advantage of that. So of course, applying, the LSAT cost of the test, as well as any prep material. Again, we've already briefly touched on that. Be doing some research on what's out there and what works with your budget and your needs, as well as eventually you'll be paying a seat deposit, hopefully, when you are going on to law school, transcript costs, that CAS report. And again, in terms of talking about the fee waivers, definitely check it out on LSAC's website because they do have some assistance for that cost as well. So it can all add up very quickly. So if you haven't done so already, start making these notes and building a spreadsheet or a Word document or writing it down on paper somewhere to help you keep up with what you're realistically going to be looking at while you're going through this process. There are also variable costs. So those perhaps indirect costs that we can't necessarily predict year after year, right? Where are you eventually going to live? If you're coming from Alabama, where we're at, and you're moving to Seattle or you're moving to San Francisco, the costs can be substantially different. So that is something you do want to think about as you're considering ultimately where you want to go to law school. What are the costs just to be a human being, right? You've got to eat. You've got to have somewhere to live. You may need transportation. If you're living in DC, that's probably not going to be as much of an issue than if you're in rural Utah, for example, or if you're in rural Alabama. It's important to be thinking about all of those other sort of costs that are not outlined directly in the application process. And then also think about the types of aid available. So most of your law schools are going to offer what's called merit-based scholarships. That's based upon your LSAT score and your GPA that you're applying with when you submit your application. So need-based scholarships are available out there. There are some schools that do offer some need-based scholarships, but I would be thinking about how you're going to leverage your LSAT and GPA in terms of thinking strategically of where you're going to apply, where it's going to make sense for you based on your interests and needs. However, I would also like to give a shout out that there is a new scholarship databank that Access Lex has created. It is free. It is free for students. It is free for pre-law advisors. It will make your life so much easier because it's all compiled into one place. And even better, there are filters to help you sort through different characteristics of how to apply for that scholarship. I believe it's even broken down by private and possibly public, but I would still take a look. Go in and do some digging and do some of that self-research to see what's available out there. Because again, if you don't ask and if you don't look, you don't know, right? So take some time. It's worth it to search through that data bank. Because again, I want to reiterate, it is free. It is no cost, no strings attached for you. So definitely check that out. And I will turn it over to Royce if you want to talk about the outputs.
Absolutely. So Hannah covered the inputs, talking about, defining why you want to go to law school, the actual cost, the variable costs, or types of aid. So what are some of these outputs? So the first major one that, you need to include in this discussion is potential debt that you're going to have coming out of law school. So Hannah touched on, scholarships, merit, and need-based. But, if you go to a state school or a private school, there's a large difference in tuition. So a lot of people might have to take out loans for law school. So keep that in mind. Now, when you graduate from law school, depending on, the field of law that you're in, if you're working for a nonprofit, things like that, there's always the Federal Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which can always help with that. If you make, I believe it's 120 on-time payments, your debt is forgiven after 10 years of payment. So that's something to consider, especially based on the type of law that you want to go into. Another thing, too, to consider in this discussion is compensation. What are you going to be making? A lot of people, I think it comes from back in the 80s, people thought that lawyers were, raking in the big bucks. But most lawyers are not bringing in a six-figure salary. If you're working for big law, corporate law, yeah, you're going to be getting a pretty good salary. But if you're working in public interest, hopefully you're doing it because you love it and not for the pay. So this is something you need to think about as well in this discussion. And then as well, kind of to round that out with these outputs for things to consider after law school is your career satisfaction. How much do you love your job? And I kind of touched on that just a little bit earlier with, the difference between like a public interest and big law. You could be really, really passionate about both, but the difference in pay can be significant. So these are all things to really consider in the entire picture. Most people are really only thinking about in these discussions those upfront costs of applying to law school, but you really have to consider the outputs once you've finished your degree and you get out there into the real world and you start practicing. These are all things to really consider in that initial discussion.
Yeah, so actually, I have so much to say in response to what y'all have shared with us based on just some things that you mentioned. There was a question that came through in the Q&A that I was going to reserve until the end, but I think it fits nicely in this discussion as well. But first, I want to make sure you all know that in your resource list, plenty of the resources that Royce and Hannah have mentioned are there for you. So you can click on that button at the bottom and you will be able to access some of those resources, as well as Hannah and Royce's document that they provide to aspiring law school students in their advisement on the ROI discussion. Hannah, something you said around self-reflection. We have to be self-reflective. And that really just touched me because as a financial coach, we spend so much time on making sure in our advisement of those who we are talking to that we are cognizant of what we, the professionals, are bringing to that conversation and how it might be showing up in the advisement of our students. So the self-reflection piece, I think, is incredibly critical to ensure that we, for lack of a better term, maybe tarnishing maybe some of the things that we convey to our students, or we might be using that to help leverage that conversation. So I just, I really needed to comment on that because self-reflection of ourselves is so critically important in what we do with our students. Royce, you brought up public service loan forgiveness, but what we didn't also mention are LREPs, loan repayment assistant programs. So I think that there are a little over 100 law schools currently that offer some sort of LRAP, loan repayment assistance program, for their students. They all vary and look different, but that could be another element. That is another element that students can use in the return on investment discussion. So I wanted to go ahead and put that out there. But the question that came in is, when should students start their preparation to study for the bar exam? And so I know we didn't talk about this beforehand, but is this a part of your discussion in that pre-law advising and return on investment conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes time, this is one of those outputs too. I mean, you're not officially finished with law school yet, but it is part of kind of that, getting out into the real world and start practicing. I know that in speaking to several law schools, some law schools even include bar prep in their cost of tuition. So if it's something that is important to you when looking at a law school, always ask the law school, ask them what their bar prep is like, how are they preparing you for the bar exam? That could make a big difference in a decision that you make on where you want to attend law school.
And I also want to go back just for a second. Definitely, I want to echo Royce's comment that you definitely always need to be asking what's available. But to go back to what I said about the self-reflection piece is we're going to help encourage you as your pre-law advisor to get through that application process and help you feel confident about each move that you're making to get through it. But once you leave us, it's going to be on you to sustain that motivation and to sustain that drive of, I'm going to not just get through the next years, but I'm also going to get through this big test, because there's going to be many tests, but you're going to have one big test, with the exception of a few states, because there has been some emergency situations in terms of the delay of the bar. However, assuming in most cases, you're going to have that big test at the end, and depending on what state you're in, it's important to know if you're going to be taking a universal bar where you can practice in many states, or if you're going to a state where you're going to be certified to practice in one state. Those are all critical to know, not exactly in this moment if you're just going through the application process, but as you're going along, and even those offers start to come in, is to think about that post part of, okay, I've got 2 schools that I'm looking at. One state would allow me eventually to practice in several areas, and one would allow me to practice at home. So that will become, I think, naturally a part of the conversation, but I wouldn't necessarily put it at the forefront and ache over it, so to speak, at the very beginning. That will come with time. And like I said previously, your career counselors, when you do matriculate to law school, they're going to become a big part of that conversation as well, because hopefully you'll be interning in the state where you ultimately want to be. If you go to Alabama law, perhaps you don't want to stay in Alabama and practice. Perhaps you want to go to DC. And that I know for certain in our relationship over the years that students have gone on to do that. So I wouldn't ache and stress over that part just yet, but know that it will eventually come, and be at peace with that, because it will make your life and that reflection so much easier for yourself.
Be at peace with that. Oh, I love that. And before we move on to the next question, let's talk about opportunity costs, shall we? So in your conversations with students, do you often find yourself, or how often do you find yourself talking to students about what they would actually be giving up to go to law school? And do you work on that from a quantitative, qualitative, or both standpoint?
I would say that it really comes down to go back to the application cycle. When are you applying? Is this the best time of year with what you have to work with, your LSAT score and your GPA, to apply? Or if you've already applied, what are the offers that are on the table? Perhaps by waiting another year, could you maybe retake the LSAT and have a higher score to work with? That will more than likely increase that scholarship offer the next time around that school may be willing to offer you, because we do know a lot of it also plays into rankings and plays into how law schools are sort of trying to plan out what their class is going to look like. So that way when it comes out in the World News Report, it comes out the way they're hoping it will eventually be published, right? So timing matters. It absolutely matters. If you are on the fence, I would say from my personal experience, just speaking anecdotally, and also from the conversations we've had with law school reps, and many of them, is if you are not for sure, or if you're really uncertain, take a year. Do something that you love, or perhaps work, because that's experience that you are adding to your resume. That is value that you can build over the year that you're not in law school, that you can't necessarily do while you're in law school. Law school will always be there. You can always apply later, and your LSAT score is good up to 5 years. So just because you take it right now and you're maybe thinking about applying right now doesn't mean you have to apply, but you do have to think about a plan B. In terms of the quantitative part, it's really hard to capture and say, we know our students are making X dollars every year that they're not in law school, just because we have a lot of students from around the country who go home, who are from many different states. So we are a little bit challenged by the data, but I can say we've had a significant number of our students who are alumni now who applied last cycle because a gap year served them to either do Peace Corps, to do Fulbright, Teach for America, to go work at perhaps they do have a parent who works at a law firm and they're perhaps interning under another attorney, or perhaps they're working in retail, any number of things. But I would say that you do have to understand that this is time that you are foregoing earnings, right? And again, be at peace with that, because this is a pathway to a profession. What that profession will look like is ultimately determined by you and what you want to pursue. But again, you do have to be at peace with you are foregoing these potential earnings, whether it's I'm going to go work in law enforcement or do something completely different now that you have a bachelor's degree and can go out into the job market. You do have to understand and again, recognize that you'll be putting those earnings on pause while you're in law school, but it can lead to a great return on your investment by having that higher level credential. And even if you don't practice, there are many jobs out there that are considered JD advantage, meaning by having a JD, you had an advantage in terms of being hired. And that information is reported as well in those employment outcomes. So definitely take a look at that for the law schools that you're applying to.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think in my experience, as far as the opportunity cost goes, like Hannah said, it's really in terms of that. What do you want to do? Is it going to be a gap year? Do you want to maybe get an MBA? Do you want to go work for a few years? I think those are really, in my experience, the most important conversations that I have with students as far as, what would you be giving up going to law school? So I think those are all great points that you brought up, Hannah.
Great, great, great. Okay, I think we can transition to the next question. And some of this we've already touched on, right? But what are some of those resources that you have found to be particularly useful for students in that ROI discussion?
I can go first if you want, Hannah. So thinking about resources, we've really, I think in all of our previous little conversations we've touched on a lot of them. But starting locally, what are your local resources? So for us here at the University of Alabama, we utilize our on-campus partners. And so we've started what we call our pre-law faculty staff collaborative. And so these are our faculty partners on campus who are involved with our pre-law students, professors in political science and history, criminal justice, philosophy, all these different areas that touch on areas of the law that a lot of our pre-law students are interested in. So this is something that we started a couple of years ago, and we check in with our partners every year just to make them aware of all of the opportunities that we're offering for our students. We refer a lot of our students to these faculty members as well, especially when it comes time to ask about, opportunities within their major, networking, internships, all of these things that law schools are really looking for in their applicants. We really utilize our campus partners to assist us in getting our students these resources. And then another really good local resource, we're very fortunate to have here at the University of Alabama, is the University of Alabama Law School right here on our campus. So as we were speaking earlier, about as a pre-law advisor, as a student, making those network connections earlier. This is another great resource. So one of the things that we do for our pre-law students who take our pre-law seminar course is we schedule a tour of the law school every semester for those students. They get to speak with the Dean of Admissions, and they get a personalized tour of the law school from a current law student. So this, I believe, is one of the greatest resources that we have here for undergraduate students to really get a good look at what law school is like and to really ask those questions, especially of a current student. Many pre-law students don't get that opportunity. So that's another great resource that we have locally. So we would encourage any pre-law advisors to look for those resources locally on your campus that are already available to you. And if you haven't already started making those connections, definitely reach out to any of the faculty and staff in the majors that are popular among your pre-law students. That's a great way to kind of get started on forging those relationships. Hannah, do you want to talk about external resources?
Yes. There are many resources that we use. Of course, a lot of them are driven by Access Lex. Again, they're our wonderful partner that we've been working with for many, many years because it's all no strings attached. I do want to, again, reiterate this. This is all free for you, so you should take advantage of that. My favorite tool is the analytics tool, and let me tell you why. I remember, I think it was in 2018, right, when you would have to pull all of those ABA 509 reports individually from the ABA website, and you would take a lot of time downloading the PDFs, transcribing them into a spreadsheet or whatever you're using to organize that information. But now they have this wonderful tool that pulls that information for you, and you can make it as broad or as granular as you want. You can, filter it by attrition rate. You can filter it by GPA percentiles. You can filter it by scholarship dollars. So again, that's all free information that is highly organized at your fingertips that you can access at any time. And I believe you can pull up to 5 schools at a time. It should be in alphabetical order, so it's pretty intuitive to search. And this is something we actually require in our pre-law seminar to help students start that research process in building their law school list. There's also the Lex Scholars Program, which is great for students from underserved backgrounds who are looking for that mentorship and LSAT component that is so critical to application success. So you should definitely take a look at that. I've already mentioned the Scholarship Databank, which I think so highly of. But a resource that we use that's pretty, I would say, not necessarily simple, but maybe it is simple and pretty intuitive, is the monthly spending plan. If you are overwhelmed by all of the resources out there to help you get organized, if you go into Access Lex, there's this wonderful spreadsheet PDF that you can go in and plug in all of those costs. So again, you've got to do a little bit of research on your part and that self-reflection of how many times am I going to plan to take the LSAT? Am I going to travel to go visit law schools? Am I going to spend X amount of dollars on my prep? That PDF will help you calculate the total costs that you'll need to think about as you go through this whole process and journey of applying and eventually matriculating to law school. So it's another assignment that we require in the course that, of course, could have some variables and some differences for each student, but everyone's going to have a sort of starting place where you're thinking about those total costs and putting that all together. And of course, LSAC has their fee waiver resources that I encourage you to take a look at. They now have 2 tiers. So there used to only be 1 tier, now there are 2. And you definitely want to check that out on the LSAC website. That's the Law School Admissions Council website, free to you. You'll have to make an account to sign up for the LSAT, so you want to go ahead and make that account anyway. But there are other resources on there. There's Discover Law. There's a Law School Hub section that they've been working on and putting a lot of effort into revamping. So definitely give that, check that out over the summer if you're applying this cycle while you have time and hopefully you're not inundated with schoolwork. Take a look at that and do a little bit of that self-reflection and research while you have time.
Yes, great. And the Plank listserv, I know we mentioned that before, but reiterating that one. Okay, so let's keep moving forward, shall we? And we've got just a little bit over 15 minutes left with our last question. And as we kind of work through this, I'm going to say to the audience, share with us in the Q&A panel your successes and challenges in the ROI advancement journey with your students. So share. We learn from each other. And so as Hannah and Royce are sharing with us, go ahead and drop that in the Q&A and I'll share some of those once we wrap this question up.
Do you want me to share challenges first and then end on a success with you, Hannah? How does that sound?
That sounds great.
So, okay. So one of the challenges I think for me in this discussion with students is just helping them to realize all of the associated costs. So Access Lex has the excellent estimating your application cost worksheet that we do every semester in our pre-law seminar course. And this is really, really eye-opening for a lot of students. Students are obviously going to know those upfront costs like the LSAT and the application fees. But oftentimes students really don't think about, okay, I'm going to visit a law school. It's far away. I might have to fly. I'm going to have to get a hotel room. These are all things that I think a lot of pre-law students really don't consider. Now, of course, over the past few years with COVID and all that, law school visits were mostly done virtually, which really helped save a lot of money for students. I think now with everything kind of coming back in person, this is another cost that students are going to have to start considering again. But I always encourage students to reach out to the law schools they're interested in visiting. Here at the university, we have Hotel Capstone on campus. And so the University of Alabama Law School can work with that hotel. They can work with, getting you a flight. So a lot of times you might could get special rates for visiting, for hotel, for flights, all that sort of thing. So I always encourage students to reach out to the law schools and schedule those visits, because you never know what sort of resources they might have for you. But I think for me, that's always been the biggest challenge, is those, what I would consider not really hidden costs, but things that you're not really thinking about up front.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that there's a lot to think about in the entirety of the process, and having that awareness and organizing your information will serve you greatly, both as the pre-law advisor and also as the applicant. So I'll talk about both successes and challenges for this part. And I think for me, what I've been seeing more of is navigating the scholarship reconsideration process. And we want to call it reconsideration and not negotiation, because it is not a negotiation. That means something else. The law schools are offering you something that they believe is fair based on all those aspects of your application. However, circumstances can change, right? Maybe you got another internship after you applied. Perhaps you retook the LSAT. Perhaps you improved your GPA after your fall grades. And so a lot of those circumstances warrant reaching out to the law school. There are maybe perhaps a small percentage of law schools that will not reconsider your scholarship, and many of those schools will clearly outline that in the letter offer that you will receive. However, most will leave it up to you to be incumbent upon whether to ask for that reconsideration or not. And in that outline that we have created, there are tips on how to ask for a scholarship reconsideration, how to write it in a professional and respectful way. And of course, your pre-law advisor can help you navigate that conversation as well. With that said, I think the challenge is the variety of offers out there and offer types. You want to pay attention to any sort of contingencies that offer may come with. Is it for the first year? Is it contingent upon your first year GPA? Because remember, law school is not the same as undergrad. It's going to be harder. Even if you are maybe we'll say naturally, so to speak, good at school, and you manage your time well, and you stay on top of your readings, law school is a beast. It's going to take up your time and take up both your mental and your physical and spiritual energy. So you do want to make sure that you are, again, at peace with, if you choose to go to that law school, you understand the terms and conditions that come with that offer. So if you're unsure of the perhaps the value of going to one school or the other when you're thinking about which offer is better, bring that information with you when you go to your pre-law advising appointment, because it's really going to help your pre-law advisor also help you understand those terms and conditions and weigh for yourself of where you would, let's say, be most happy to go to based on what you have on the table. So read everything very carefully. And again, if you don't ask, you don't know. So make sure that if you feel that you are in a position to ask for a reconsideration, take advantage of that when possible. And I've had students navigate that and successfully. Now they've gone on to law school and they're happy and doing their thing, and they're happy to come back as our alumni and serve in our Crimson Counsel program, which is our mentorship program for alumni who have gone on to law school, who mentor our students who are going through the application process.
So good. So there was someone, Nicole mentioned a challenge, and I'm sure this will resonate with you as well as it did with me, but she said, this is a challenge. I have these great open-ended conversations with applicants where I share resources and they share their priorities, But lots of times I feel like they are looking for an exact formula or the right answer. And it's challenging to tell them that it can't be boiled down to a formula. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of students come in, I feel like they want us to tell them what to do. You know, they want us to give them the answer, even though we're giving them all of the information, all of the resources. And I think a lot of times students just need someone to talk it out with to kind of help them navigate that final decision. But absolutely, I definitely recognize that as a challenge, just as Nicole does. I think that's probably universal among all pre-law students.
I think what I would add on to that, the way I've sort of improved at navigating those conversations, is having the student talk, to Royce's point, talk through the options and practicing those listening skills. So saying things, so what I'm hearing you say is, so what I'm hearing the way you feel is about these two schools or your options, and how does that make you feel? So in a way, that counseling part, I think, is what's going to take center stage as you're helping to navigate those conversations, and reminding the student that this is your life and I can't live your life for you. You have to be at peace with your decision. So while it's a mutual relationship between the advisee and yourself as the pre-law advisor, I think it's important to always remember and reflect that the decision, whether it's a success or a failure in the outcome, is not ours. It is our applicants and what ultimately they decide to do. And so I think it's important for us, either way, success, challenge, or failure, is to be that source of motivation for next steps. Because a lot of the time, yes, it's wonderful and great when we have students they get into their top schools and they're so excited and they get money to go. But the reality is there are failures that do come with that sometimes. Maybe it's an LSAT score that wasn't as high as maybe they were hoping it would be. Perhaps there were technological challenges of the tests, which that has been something that we've had to navigate as well, of course, along with everyone else. Or perhaps they're waitlisted at a school. So I think it's more about sitting back and letting the student or applicant be in the driver's seat, and we're there just to help navigate. We're looking at that Google map and saying, maybe don't take a left turn here, but saying, okay, well, we have two routes we could pursue. Which way would you like to go? Is the best way that I can put it. So totally get it. I think, like Royce said, we all feel it. We don't want to be prescriptive. So I think the best next option is to just be a good listener and allow the student to talk through it for themselves.
Absolutely love that. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in coaching of a caring disclaimer, right? So let's set the tone of this conversation and the expectations of what you're potentially going to get out of that. And it is precisely, in my opinion, what you've just stated, you know. A couple of comments that came in, and then we will transition over to some questions. So there was a question going back to when we talked about gap year, or not a question, but just more of a comment around gap years. And so Laura mentioned it's worth passing on that a potential law student should look into the schools they're thinking about, even if they plan to take a gap year. My law school only accepts an LSAT score that is 3 years old or less, not 5. Also, if they're thinking of doing a master's degree, it is definitely advantageous to start the JD first. The ABA rule about having a JD started first in order to accept the credits for a joint degree. So they might as well save the time and money. So I wanted to make sure to mention that perspective. Let's see. Bill says, you know, given the cost to students and that law school admissions are mostly a numbers game, I do not recommend them visiting the law schools. Now, if they happen to be nearby, why not? Thank you for sharing that, Bill. Let's see. There was another question earlier on. When in the application cycle do you recommend that applicants speak with Access Lex financial coaches? anytime within that process. So just a plug here, Ask Aetna is our hub, our portal. You as administrators can have access free to Ask Aetna. I encourage you to create an account that's in your resource list. You will be able to see all of those resources that your students have access to. But within that, we have Max Pre-Law. Max Pre-Law is our online suite of services, but it also, for pre-law students, but it also comes with pre-law coaching. So feel free to share that with your students. No time is too soon. We're happy to talk with them anytime through that process. Okay. So, and one more note, I would add a resource to this discussion that I don't think has been mentioned. The NALP website provides a wealth of information the pre-law advisors can reference and use in their advising practice. Also, NALP Pre-Law Portal is a fantastic resource for students to research many realities of the legal profession and be a great place to strike curiosities and digging further into many questions students should ask and reflect on before investing in law school. Thank you so much for stating that, Rita. Absolutely important. And I'll add to that resource as well, National Conference of Bar Examiners. Many of you are aware of them, but they have a comprehensive guide to bar admission requirements that we often, in our conversations with law students, reference. It's a comprehensive, robust guide on all things for bar admission across states. So as a pre-law advisor, that could be helpful in your conversations as well. There's information in there on costs for bar-related expenses, as well as some important considerations in the bar admission process. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left, and I knew we were going to go up until time, but I do want to pose a question to you. In the previous session, again, they were talking about kind of data-informed pre-law advising. And my colleague, Tiffany Cochran, presented some data. And some of this that I'll mention, you probably won't be surprised to hear about. But we know that those who are first-generation students or underrepresented students are also historically underrepresented in the legal profession. And there were two stats that piqued my interest in that session. 39% of first-gen students look to their family members or loved ones for guidance on attending graduate or law school. But 52%, a majority, look at their advisors or their administrators. So that latter stat thereby tells us how critically important that we are to that journey. So based on that, are there any additional considerations or resources you provide in your advisement of these students in the 3 minutes we have left?
Yeah, so I would definitely say using our networks has been incredibly important. We do have the Capstone Center for Student Success at our campus that has a first generation dedicated service center. And so we've been able to network with the director there and help to make collaborative events. So that way our students who identify as first gen know they can meet with us. Sometimes we know that our first generation students are afraid to ask questions because perhaps they're used to being independent and having to figure out things themselves. So we reach out to our campus partners, as Royce mentioned earlier, which includes the Student Success Center. We've also created our own pre-law scholarships that are directly focused on and serving our students who come from underrepresented backgrounds, whether that is first generation status and or maybe they're Pell Grant recipients, or perhaps they come from neurodiverse or other different identities. We want to be inclusive as possible because we understand, again, the whole point is this is not a cheap process. This is not just a marathon in terms of applying, but also all of those costs add up. And so of all the conversations we've had with our students over the year, we have highlighted and identified that financial support is an important part of what we do in helping to ensure that we create the resources to help students get there. So we've created that out of our law school fair revenue. We host the law school fair every year. We also partner with our Future Black Law Student Association and our Pre-Law Student Association when we have guest speakers come in, or we host events, or we invite cross-collaboration in our programs such as the Marshall Motley Scholars Program. Our representative came down to have a conversation with those groups and how we can support all students in terms of going to law school, but especially those who may not have the capital just yet to get there. So we're trying to really make moves to broaden our connections and do what we can to make sure that students understand that we're not just looking at the top 14 law schools. There's a law school for everyone, and we want to make sure that you have the information that you need to get where you're hoping to go. So we're really just trying to be transparent and as accessible as possible.
Sure. Awesome way to end. Awesome way to end. So we are at 2:30, at least Eastern time. And so we have come to the end. I did see there was an additional question in there from Bill. Bill, I will follow up on that and contact you if I can get an answer. Either way, I will contact you. But with that, we have come to the end of our time. I want to send a sincere thanks to Hannah and Royce. It is such a joy to work with you every single semester. And it's an honor for you to be a wealth of knowledge for myself and those attending this session today. Just a couple of notes as you exit. We have a survey. If you know anything about Access Lex, we love your feedback and we need your feedback. We would not be able to do this without you. So there is the survey button at the bottom part of your screen. That's the survey for this session right now. If you can take some time to complete that. And then when you exit, you will be presented with another survey as well for the overall spring sync. So thank you so much again for taking the time to be here. You can feel free to head back over to the hub and our Together Time break. And I think they might be giving some more prizes away. Take care of yourselves. Thanks again.